Hello, everyone. Welcome to Arash's World. Today, we have a very special guest who's no stranger to Arash's World. How are you doing, Carla?
I am doing really well, thank you.
Wonderful. So we've had connections through my blog, Arash's World blog, as well as the podcast. But I still would like you to briefly introduce yourself to our audience here. What would you say about yourself?
Wow, me. I am a student. I am always a student. I'm ever learning, ever evolving. I am many things. I am a wife. I am a writer. I am a mom. I am a dog mom as well. I am a lover of nature, a lover of travel and exploration. I am an author, a podcaster, a researcher, a clinical psychologist, all of these things, and so many more.
Yeah, and I love how you like to explore, and again, also podcasting and social media using those things. But we want to today talk about your book, which is your latest book, The Joy of Imperfect Love: The Art of Creating Healthy, Securely Attached Relationships. I love the word joy in it, and love, of course. I love the word love, and the art. I like how you're using the art of creating it. So, what would you briefly say about your book? Why this specific title? And also, one of the questions that I have for you to get us started is what's so wrong or bad about perfection?
So, why the title? I'll start there. Why the joy of imperfect love? I think that we often forget in our quest for romantic love or to be the perfect parent or the perfect daughter or wife or husband or friend or whatever it is, we often forget just to look for the joy in our relationships,
Mhm,
to be joy seekers
mhm.
rather than trying to make everything perfect or make the other person perfect. And so that takes us into, so that's where the joy comes from. And the second piece, why the what is it with perfection
Mhm,
that is problematic? And perfection in and of itself is not a problem if it's a thing.
mhm.
But even if it's a thing and we want that perfect car, that perfect house, we can really drive ourselves crazy keeping it, buying it in perfect condition and then keeping it in perfect condition. And I think there's a time when we really want to dial back our quest for perfect in things, and certainly being the perfect person or having the perfect partner or the perfect friend. Because when we do that, we don't make allowances for uniqueness, we don't make allowances for individual differences. And in many ways, the worst way that it shows up is we're not kind to ourselves or to other people.
We focus on flaws because that's the idea of
Yes.
perfection, right? And then we
Yes.
magnify them and we lose track. And a lot of people have ideas about relationships that it's work, and it does take effort. Of course, it is in that sense, it is a work, but there's also the joy aspect of it, the joyful aspects of a relationship and any type of relationship that we're looking at. And to really delve into that and not just get sidetracked by the flaws or the irritations or the annoyances that creep up. But again, that's part of the whole deal.
Absolutely. It's interesting that you're saying this. I just did an interview earlier today about the ick factor in
Mhm,
relationships. And what is an ick factor? And I think the ick factor comes from sometimes it's, this gut response to something that's truly not safe for us.
mhm,
You know, meat or something that's gone bad, so we
mhm,
get this ick. But sometimes in our highly perfectionistic world, we don't make space for somebody to be different, to be quirky, to be unique. We
mhm,
don't make space for our own quirkiness and uniqueness. And I'm not talking about maladaptive behaviors here. I'm talking about just the simple things that make somebody them. And we're sometimes good at the saying, oh, you be you. Right. And yes, and we want to do that when the behavior isn't toxic, when it's something where somebody's intentions are good. Well, let them be them. But often, even especially we see it in little ones, little kiddos, where they're just experimenting with the world and trying out who they are and how they show up in the world. And that's where it starts. Kids are taught to let go of their individuality in order to become conformists. And then it erodes self-esteem because going back to the ick piece, well, then we start saying ick to our own uniqueness and ick to other people's uniqueness. And again, I'm not saying that we're making space for toxic behaviors,
Mhm.
but we do want to make space for the parts that make us different, that make us
Exactly.
beautiful, that make us wonderful and interesting.
Yeah, and embracing the inner child. And I like the experimenting. I mean, I still do that. And I think, but we kind of think that we have to have it figured out by a certain age. We say, now, okay, I've done this. This is my path now. And I find like life has so many curveballs too, where you just have to maybe change your direction, change your mindset, change your views about things. And so, and that is necessary, and that is wonderful, actually. That is a beautiful thing that happens.
Absolutely. And we can talk about the inner child piece, uh, even the healing part of the inner child. But yes, I so believe if somebody thinks they'll ever get it figured out, oh my goodness, well, blessings to you, because
Yeah,
I know I will never figure it out. Every time I think I'm getting somewhat close to it, you're right. Life
exactly.
throws you a curveball just to prove that, the name of the game
Mhm,
isn't not getting challenged
mhm,
and not changing. The game is how well can you adapt to it?
mhm,
How well can you lean into it and go with the flow? Because truly, the moment we stop growing and learning, the moment our insides start to suffocate and die.
mhm, mhm. And relationships is an entity of itself. It's also alive. It's also dynamic. And in your book, you talk about four different styles of relationships, and I want to look into that. And I feel like those are kind of cycles that we go through various of them. Well, based on my experiences, I think it's sometimes this, then it's that, and but it shouldn't be stuck. We shouldn't get stuck in one unless, again, it's one of the more positive ones. But what are the four styles of relationships? And then what can we say about those?
I agree with you that sometimes our relationship styles change depending upon the nature of the relationship.
Mhm,
And the format that I use in the Joy of Imperfect Love are the styles of being hyper independent. So we
mhm,
are divergent. So
mhm.
imagine a V where you start
Yeah.
off somewhat together, but you go in two separate directions. And when you have two people doing that, whether they're friends or romantic partners or parent child, you will not know the other person because you're on two different trajectories. So that's the very hyper independent style, the divergent style. Then we have the parallel style again, two lines, and they're, on train tracks and they appear to be going in the same direction, but there's not a lot of communication. There's not any connection. They are literally on two different trajectories. And this is where I often hear people say, I don't know my son, or I don't know my partner. I don't know my friend anymore. It's even though we see each other or we're at work together or we're sleeping in the same bed, but they're not having interactions that build that
Mhm,
connection. And then we have the other style, which is a very entangled style.
mhm,
Think of it like spaghetti all caught together or yarn all caught together. And that is the style where two people, generally very anxious people, come together and become very enmeshed so that they feel safe often, but they're not able to explore themselves outside of the relationship. And then we have what I believe is the healthiest style, which is an interdependent style. And this looks almost like a braid in a sense that is very loosely woven. So it comes together, that braid comes together, but then it goes out
mhm,
and then on parallel tracks and then back together and then out, almost like you're doing the braiding on somebody's hair. And the reason that this is such a lovely style, it allows for dependence, which we often go, oh no, I can't be dependent on someone. But we need, as human beings, we need to be able to depend on other people. But it also supports independence and connection. So we want in this style, we're okay being alone. We don't rely on the other person to meet our needs in every area, and we're okay coming back into the relationship, being vulnerable, connecting, talking, then moving back out into separate interests, whether they're work or hobbies, then coming back together. So it's autonomy, yet connection.
Mhm. And being in a way in sync, because I find, like as you're saying, so there's changes in our lives that one of us changes and then the other has to sort of change too, or catch up, or change in their own way. And so there's this like constantly like different phases that you would go through in a relationship. But I think one thing that is very important and you talk about in your book is communication, to keep those lines open, and there are different kinds of communication, different forms that it could take, but also allowing a healthy conflict there, a certain amount of conflict, because then that can give the opportunity to resolve them and to grow from it.
Absolutely. And I think it's a very important piece because let's just go into the healthy conflict well, we can start with the growth. So we're always changing.
Mhm,
Every day we're changing.
mhm,
We may not be growing, but we're changing. Life
mhm,
changes us.
mhm,
And the moment we get a cold or read something in the newspaper that
mhm,
scares us or whatever, we're changing. So my concept comes from the place of if we are going to change, why not be the masters of our change?
mhm,
Why not engage in conscious change rather than allowing life's vicissitudes to take us where it may, instead of saying, wait a second, if I'm going to change today, I'm going to change mindfully, I'm going to change for the better. And in our relationships, we often say, oh, my partner should not change me. I should not change my partner. And I just disagree with that so much. I believe that if I'm going to change and my partner has something to teach me, and I can grow or I can teach my partner something or expose my partner to something new. Why not?
mhm,
Why, what about me if I said, oh, I'm not going to let my partner change me? Hey, if my partner's going to change me and help me be more loving or more conscientious or more mindful, or of
mhm,
course, bring it on. So I think our fear in our society
mhm.
that we should not change or should not be changed, it makes no sense to me. It just
Yeah,
makes no sense because when we go into a work environment, if we say to our, boss or coworker, "Oh, don't you dare teach me anything. Don't you dare change me." They're going to
yeah.
say, "Well, okay, you're not a very good team member here. Why are you here if you don't want to learn and grow with the job?" And so I think it's very much that process of being intentional about our change. And of course, if a partner or anyone is asking us to change in a way that doesn't suit us or is toxic and doesn't fit our moral compass, then by all means,
Mhm,
we have the right and the responsibility to say, nope, you're crossing my boundaries. I'm not going there. This isn't
mhm,
healthy for
mhm,
me. So, and I think now to a point about the conflict, individuals are going, from the time we're we're old enough to say no,
mhm,
right? And even before then, there's conflict. We each have a mind of our own. So making space for each partner, each person, parent, child, lover to lover, whatever the relationship is, making space for healthy conflict. I'm not a believer in fighting
mhm,
or arguing.
mhm,
I think those take us into a very defended, warlike state. But I am a believer in having differences because we're different human beings and being able to talk through our differences.
mhm.
And
Exactly.
sometimes that doesn't mean that we end in a place of agreement,
Mhm,
but sometimes it means we just end up being able to see the other partner's perspective and saying, okay, I get it. That's your perspective. I'm letting you have that perspective. Please allow me to have mine.
yeah, exactly. And we do change. We constantly change. And but nowadays, I think, and that's the idea of perfection too. We think we need to align to who we were in the past. So there needs to be a sort of like stability, because let's say in the past you used to like this, and why did you change? And so we come like kind of like mini politicians where it's like, okay, I have to follow the platform. And but that's not the case. I mean, we do change. And it's like that was me in the past. That was me a day ago. That was me a year ago, but now I've changed, and to welcome that. And so it's often frowned about because there's this illusion that we need to remain stable and be the same person, but we constantly, it's fluid, we change, we adapt to new situations, and it influences us in many ways. So we don't have to conform to that old idea of ourselves or the person we used to be if we realize, hey, this is so much better, or this is really more authentic, this is more me than the person I was, for example, in the past, and try to find kind of leeway there and freedom to change and to accept that change in another person too.
Yes, and I love how you put that and you're so right because I always laugh when people say, "Oh, God, I wish I could be in high school again," or "I wish I could be in college again."
Yes, yes.
And I look back, to me and go, "God, would I want to be 17 again and go through all that again? Would I want to be 25 and go through all those growing pains again?" And so I recognized her in the past, that version of me, and I have great compassion for her, but I see that the me now is so much wiser.
Mhm, mhm.
Still lacking in wisdom in a lot of ways, but that idea of recognizing the person we were in the past and also saying, yes, I've changed and I've changed because I've worked really hard to change, to become more aware, to, step to my own beat, my own drum.
Yeah.
And so I do think that's a lovely thought of being able to say, yes, I have the right and perhaps the responsibility of changing and evolving. And that's a piece I hit a lot in The Joy of Imperfect Love, the journey of evolving,
Mhm,
and how I see us all as coming into the world. We're perfect as little ones, probably more perfect in many ways, but we get some pretty rough edges as we're
mhm.
parented and we're in society. And so we want to keep polishing those rough edges to become these more beautiful, loving souls that we have the capacity who can do good in the world, do good for ourselves, our relationships. And so I think that that is a privilege and a responsibility to work on the polishing of the self.
Mhm. It's a process of discovery and self-discovery and so on. So
Yes.
if I could go back to my teen self, I would say just do whatever you're doing, just take it easy. I was like, just relax. Things are gonna be fine. And it's that worry when you're, let's say you fail an exam in high school at university and you're worried about it, just relax. And I'm imagining my older self to come and tell me the same thing now. So then I think that's important because we get sometimes often worried about things that are not that important in many cases, where we need to take it a bit easier, relax a bit more, just see the joy of things, the other side, and not just be bogged down by these worries of either the past, thinking about the future, and just enjoying that mindful moment of bliss of the present that we have. And that if we don't see it, it will escape, it'll go away unused. And there's so much potential in that moment. And just to often take it easy and relax for a moment, to take a break of things.
Yes, yes. And I think that it all depends. It's such good points, Arash, because when I think of my, say, 15-year-old self, I probably wouldn't say to her, take a break. I would probably say something like to her, like, find some mental health support, find
Mhm,
people who feel safe, people who
mhm,
listen to you,
mhm.
find, it would be, so it's interesting if, we all pause to look at what are at our different ages and
Yeah,
see what messages.
yeah.
The message about taking it easy, that's probably a message I'd give myself a little more now, like, hey, relax a little more, you don't have to work so hard, kind of thing. And I think those are lovely parts about our imperfections, bringing it back to that word. Life is so
Yeah.
imperfect. We are so imperfect, and we can often only see in hindsight, if we are even able to, what that younger self would have needed, even that younger self of yesterday, where so many people I work with, clients will say, "Oh my God, I'm so upset at myself. I did this or I did that. I should have known better." And I think, no, well, all of these shoulds, these
Yeah,
aren't helpful.
yeah,
Let's
exactly.
just be gentle with ourselves and pause. And instead of saying, I should have done this, I was so stupid, I was this or that, just going back to that day, whether it was yesterday or 5 years ago or whenever it was, and saying, well, now that I know differently,
Mhm,
now that I can see it in hindsight, what would I do differently?
mhm, mhm,
And lean into what you would
mhm,
have done
mhm,
differently rather than
mhm.
beating yourself up about something you have no
Exactly,
control over,
exactly.
because it is those moments in our imperfection where we can actually really move into being kinder
Mhm.
to ourselves. And
Yeah.
every time, and it doesn't mean giving ourselves a free pass to be horrible human beings.
Mhm.
It means to take the moments where we are less than what we would hope to be,
Mhm.
and using them to become better.
Yeah, I recently found my journal from when I was a teen, and I was reading it, and it was written in German, but I was like, it was so fascinating. It's like this book that I was reading about myself, and I had so much sympathy for the guy, and I think it's yes, he was struggling, and he was probably borderline depressed and so on, but he was fine in the end because he figured things out, and I got to this point seeing myself back then. But then it really like you accept your past in many ways. It's like, well, yeah, of course. I mean, he's trying hard or she's trying hard and so on. So I think it's important to write, maybe to keep diaries and journals so that you can look back later on and just see what you're going through and understand it better. Because again, from the past, we come from the past, so we are related to that person, but we've evolved in a different direction. We've taken a different path often, and that adds to that element of self-discovery too.
Absolutely. And I love that you brought up the point about journaling and how you read it so many years later, because
Mhm.
often people journal and read it the next day or
Mhm.
the next week.
Mhm.
And when they're still in that hurting place or raw, so they use what they wrote unconsciously to judge themselves or self-limit or say, oh, and so am a firm believer in journaling, but I love making them sacred spaces where we put them away. And
Mhm.
if we read them
Mhm.
at all, read them 5 years later, 10
Yes,
years later,
exactly.
30 years later,
Yeah.
and where you can say, wow, I really did make it through that. That's pretty
Mhm.
awesome. Or
Mhm.
I have transformed. But journaling is absolutely a great tool for self discovery. And somebody who's listening might say, well, how am I going to learn if I don't reread it? I think the psyche works.
Yes.
Oh, it works behind the scenes. When we put something down in paper or do a good therapy session or a talk session with a friend, and we just let it be and go for a walk or take a bubble bath or, take a hike, the psyche's working behind the scenes. The psyche wants us to be our best selves. So I don't think we have to push it as much as we sometimes think.
Yeah, it's a way of processing too, where we are talking, thinking, feeling those emotions, and that is so important. Now, whether it's journaling or through art, I mean, if you create art and so on, that's also something that shows how you're feeling at the moment. If it's again true, authentic art, it resonates with one. But I want to talk about also here loving yourself and being able to love others, and how important it is to really have that relationship with ourselves. That it's a good relationship because then that translates into a good relationship with others too. So it's kind of interconnected, and the importance of again loving yourself, which a lot of us find hard to do, myself included. It's something that it seems it goes against us in many ways, where we just too critical. We have the inner critic who's just like not happy with things and so on. But really to accept and love ourselves, I think that is hugely important. Tough though, but hugely important.
Absolutely. And I think, Arash, that people, when they're talking about concepts like self-love,
Mhm.
that they don't realize that there are different things like self-love and self-care, and that
Mhm.
self-love, some people think that self-love is selfish
Mhm.
or
Mhm.
something that I have self-love or I don't have
Yeah.
self-love. And so I think it's important to talk about the definitions a bit,
Mhm.
that self-love is something that, especially if we grew up in a high functioning household where, the attachment was secure, we might have pretty good self-love
Mhm.
from early on if we had parents who attuned to us or caregivers who attuned to us. And so you might start off in those situations with a higher set point of self-love
Mhm.
that is easier to maintain and to embrace and to continue to nurture and feed. But for many people, they grow up in situations where there is an insecure form of
Mhm.
attachment. There is a lot of, say, criticism or negativity or, you know, f- messages that feed a sense of low self-worth. And in those cases, which are really, they're really prevalent, And it's also made worse by social media, where you're getting messages quite often of you are not good enough, you are not perfect enough, you are not this or that enough. And so we really need to be able to understand that self-love for a person who grew up in a more toxic or traumatizing or less than attuned childhood environment, their set point of self-love, no, they are not wrong or broken. It just might be much lower, like a very dry desert compared to somebody else's green, rich grass.
Mhm.
And so for that person, they may need to spend years and find healthy relationships where the self-love is fed. Now, the reason I'm saying a relationship, we can do our own work with self-love and grow that and feed that on our own. But if we're in a toxic relationship with someone who's constantly trying to erode our level of self-love, self-worth, then it's that desert's going to stay drier longer.
Yes.
Um, and so ideally, we're able to move into relationships with people who see us, who attune to us, who love us. And while we are doing our self-love work, our self-esteem work, our self-confidence work, all of which are different, then, especially if we're surrounded by people who are loving and gentle and caring and trustworthy, then that self-love grows. It's like soil that, has richer soil for us.
Exactly. Yeah. And emotional intelligence, it's very important. We're focusing a lot about intelligence and we want our kids to be intelligent. We want to be intelligent, but the emotional aspects is that is so much more important in my view than just pure intelligence because it affects various parts of life. And you do talk about that. So what would you say about emotional intelligence and its relevance, its importance for having a good relationship with ourselves and others as well?
I love the concept of emotional intelligence, and it's a lot of people have overused the term in
Mhm.
work environments and such. And so I try and take it back to its roots. What
Mhm.
is emotional
Mhm.
intelligence? And the beauty of emotional intelligence is cognitive intelligence, which our society really prizes. It's
Mhm.
something that we're either born with or not. We can get it increased in certain areas, but it's more genetic. Whereas emotional intelligence, although, although a lot of it has to do with how we're raised, is something we can all earn. It's the equalizer. It is, I don't care how intellectually intelligent someone is. Some of the most intellectually intelligent people I've met are some of the worst to be around. I'll take somebody with a lower, intellectual IQ who has a good emotional intelligence any day. Why? Because they are generally good communicators. They tend to understand things like moral compass, respect, trustworthiness, kindness, empathy, sympathy, kind-heartedness, doing good for the planet, doing good for other people. So that is what emotional intelligence does for us. It helps us look not just at our emotions, but how we interact within the self and interact with others, always working toward highest good. Highest good, because if Dr. Carla is working toward her highest good, I'm very unlikely to harm anyone or anything. And if we each do that and say, as a partner, I'm working toward my highest good. If you're working toward your highest good, you're not going to go and cheat on a partner or, steal from your neighbor or kick the kid or the dog or what. No, you won't, because you're trying so hard to evolve. And that is how I see emotional intelligence. It becomes our guiding light, it becomes our sun in the sky. And again, that's where perfectionism comes in, because if we just accept from the fact I'm a work in progress,
Mhm.
I, Carla, will never know everything. I will not always get it right. There are times my emotions will be frazzled and I'll look back and I'll say, I could have done that better. And okay, so next time do it better,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so that's what emotional intelligence, it allows us to really grow in these areas of emotional regulation, of communication, of boundaries, of knowing our needs, speaking our needs, all of these different areas. And it's what makes our relationships smoother when
Mhm.
we have higher
Mhm.
emotional intelligence.
And it's messy. I mean, when we go through it, it's messy, but we need that messiness to get there. It's like, I imagine like Picasso would have like messy hands, and probably like his whole like body would be messy for creating those works of art. And the same way our lives are works of art, when we need to dive into that messiness. And when you talk about emotional intelligence, I always think of leaders, and they're not necessarily intellectuals. They actually connect with empathy, with feelings, and so on, and they lead by example and so on. So I think that is, especially empathy, is a very important aspect of it, where you don't just look at a person intellectually as like, well, this is the right thing to do, or this is how it should respond, but how does it affect them emotionally as well, and how did you feel when you went through similar feelings? I think that's important for connection, empathy. And I know some psychologists who are frowning upon empathy. They say, well, it has some negative connotations. I disagree with that. I think empathy is so important for our relationships with others.
I know there is a new book out about the downside of empathy,
Exactly.
and I'm not curious enough to buy it, but I'm curious about why somebody would say that in a world that so desperately needs empathy and more of it. And of course, I'm sure it sells books because people will want to know what that person is talking about. And all of those people who prefer not to have empathy because it makes life more convenient, they'll use it as a weapon to move
Yeah.
through life without empathy. But I do want to go back to something that you said about leaders. And I know you didn't mean to be general about good leaders have empathy. I do think that the best leaders, in whether they're leaders of a family, leaders of a church, a corporation, a store, whatever it is, um, they will have empathy. But unfortunately, and I will not name names because I don't like getting into politics, but we can look in the political realm at some leaders who they are leaders and leaders in big ways with big impact and a lot of force, and they do not have empathy. And when we look at how leaders without empathy, and there's a certain individual in Russia we might look at and say, oh, this individual has no empathy. Now he's come far and has done away with a lot of people, including Alexei Navalny, and we can see that. And it is that force of, I don't know what one would call it, evil, whatever or the antithesis of empathy, whatever you want to call it, that we want to take care when we look and say, this is our leader and this leader, leaders have empathy. There are a lot of leaders, and we want to be able to look at them and recognize that many leaders, many politicians don't have empathy. In fact, I remember hearing about that many people believe that true sociopaths, those with antisocial personality disorder, that a lot of them end up as politicians. And I would believe that. I'm not saying that certainly is applicable to all politicians, but for people who get very far in life like that, there is sometimes a part of them that kills any inkling, any drop of empathy they may have had or likely did have, and become so self-absorbed and self-interested. And so I think that tells us the lesson in a very technicolor way of what we might look like
Yeah.
in a world without empathy. We would be people who would do anything that we needed to get our needs met.
Yeah.
And is that the kind of world we want to live in? It's certainly not the kind of world I want to live in.
Exactly. Yeah, but I'm thinking of the leader for me, a leading like person, somebody we want to follow, somebody who inspires us, and so on. But we often like designate the leaders to people who do not deserve that term, as you're mentioning here, people. And so I think that's important. It's not just the leader like a strong figure and so on, but somebody who really moves us, inspires us, who understands us, who feels for us, who has empathy, as you're saying too, and really wants the best for everyone, not just for themselves. And that is the problem we see with when people are too focused on their own goals and ambitions, whereas others who are always remembered for their acts because they inspire us, like nonviolence and Martin Luther King Jr. and Gandhi and many others who are like these towering figures that really care. And I think that's important. And if you don't care, I don't think you it would make a good leader in my view. So, and that's the issue though we have with the modern world and with politics in particular.
Absolutely. And I think that's why it's so fun to have these kind of conversations because we're able to call out and talk about the things that we sometimes might miss because when you
Mhm.
think of the word leader, just, oh, a leader. Yes, of course that's somebody. They will take me down the right path. They're leading me, they're guiding me.
Yeah,
And yet, so many leaders take advantage of that and
that's right.
have done,
Mhm.
have done it over millennia.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so we want to learn as consumers,
Mhm.
as
Mhm.
humans,
Mhm.
to be very wise about who we are choosing to follow.
Mhm.
And that comes even back to the podcasts we listen to, the books we pick up,
Mhm.
when we cast our vote, to really be mindful about what am I consuming? Who am I choosing? What am I choosing to follow? And taking it back to the word imperfect, because that's our topic, right?
Mhm.
Giving ourselves grace when we get it wrong.
Yeah.
Right? Being
Yeah.
able to say, I cast my vote for that person, and now that I see how it's turned out, I'm gonna vote differently next time round, right?
Exactly.
Or
And there are
I
people who voted one way throughout their lives. It's okay to change, if you realize, like, wait a minute, this is not aligning with who I am. I think I like the term inner compass. If something does not resonate with my inner compass, I was like, it doesn't matter who it is or what their political affiliation, it just doesn't gel with me, it doesn't connect with me. And I think to have that independence instead of conforming, it's like, well, I've always voted this way, so I will continue the same way. And just as an example, I mean, this is just one idea. So there is that opportunity for breaking out, for changing and going a different direction, if it is again what we realize, hey, this is what I really feel like. This is who I am. This is my inner core speaking, and recognizing that too.
absolutely, and I love that you brought it, up the point about continuing to change because many people, when they vote, political voting,
Mhm.
any kind of voting, because we,
Mhm.
we vote with our dollars, we vote with
Yeah.
where we put our money. But they'll say, "Oh, wait, why are you doing that?" "Oh, because I've always done it." "Why are you saying that?" "Because I've always said it." "Why are you?" Because I've always isn't really a good reason.
Yeah.
If you ever find yourself saying, "I do this because I've always done it," whether you're overeating or not
Mhm.
exercising or
Mhm.
um, throwing trash on the ground, whatever it is, if your answer is, if you can say to yourself, well, I'm doing it because I've always done it, rather than because this is what's best for me today.
Mhm. Mhm.
This is what's
Yeah.
wisest for me.
Yeah.
And I love the reason I really love that is, for example, if somebody's eating, they find that they're eating a pint of ice cream
Mhm.
every night. Why are you doing that? Well, I don't like it. I feel really sick in the morning. I'm really mad at myself because I'm gaining weight.
Mhm.
Well, why are you doing that? Well, I've always done that.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's look at why you've always done that. And let's see if you want to change, because just because you've always done it. And that's the part where we get to be the masters of our own
Yeah.
change. We
Yeah.
don't have to buy the scripts in our head.
Yeah.
We get to start questioning them.
Yeah.
And that's a big piece in the book where I know you've read it, so I say, look at your inner narratives, look at what
Mhm.
they're
Mhm.
telling you,
Yeah.
and start questioning them. If they're not working for you, start questioning them and talk back.
Mhm, mhm. And be aware of it. I mean, so past relationships that ended in failure or did not work out were toxic doesn't mean that you have to continue with that trend. I mean, it's that kind of realization. It's like, okay, well, let's figure things out. Let's not follow that same path. Let's do something different, perhaps, and learn from those experiences instead of blindly stepping in another doomed relationship and so on. And this is the narrative. I love that what you're saying of like changing the narrative, changing the mindset a little bit, experimenting like that child. It's like, well, I'm going to try this for a change and so on to break out of that rut or the routine we often have, which might not always be the best choice for us.
Absolutely. And for most of us, that idea of change brings up fear.
Yes, of course.
It makes us scared and we fear change.
Mhm,
And that's something that we're wired to do. We're
mhm,
wired to fear change because if we're in our safe little cave,
mhm,
then we're much more protected from lions and tigers and bears.
mhm.
Yet if we don't venture out of that cave, we will never see the
Mhm,
daffodils or
mhm,
taste the
mhm,
strawberries or
mhm,
differentiate between the sour berry and the sweet berry and all of
mhm.
those things. And so I think it's that piece where when we allow ourselves to experience the
Yes,
anxiety that comes with wanting to move in a different direction, saying, oh,
yes.
well, I want to do this differently. I want to
Mhm.
see what it's like to um, try a
Yes.
new sports class or try a different type of relationship or maybe think that there is somebody out there who won't be constantly critical of me
Mhm,
or
mhm.
maybe I can go and apply for a better job. The minute we start stepping out of often I call it a jail cell of
Oh,
fear,
mhm,
right?
sure.
We start stepping out of that. And of course, it's scary. I've been there, right?
Mhm, mhm.
It's scary when we leave.
Yeah.
First off, it's scary when we realize that many times our jail cell is self-imposed.
Yeah.
That's one of
Mhm.
it's like,
Yeah.
whoa, I did this to myself.
Mhm,
And that's a wake-up call. And then once we start opening the door, then we realize, oh, I locked myself in to this scary cell
mhm.
where I wasn't allowing myself to change.
Yes.
That means I can open the door and okay, as I'm stepping out, boy, there's a lot of light. Ooh, it's different.
Yeah.
And that brings up anxiety. But then once we start looking around and dancing and
Mhm,
experimenting, oh my goodness, that's where the joy comes from.
mhm,
That's
mhm.
where the
Yeah.
joy of
Perfect love.
imperfect love comes from. When we lean into joy, lean into love, lean into kindness instead of leaning into our fears.
And once you do that, you don't want to go back to the cave or the jail. You go, what was I doing
No.
there? I don't want to go back there, please, and so on. I think that's very important. And so also love. When we talk about love, some people have different concepts about it, and it's like, well, I'm not free, and I'd rather be free than have love. But for me, actually, true freedom, paradoxically, comes to through love. When you feel yourself, and we talk about different types of relationship, where if you have someone who truly loves you and really cares about you, that is the absolute freedom. You are free. It's not like getting bogged down and so on. So that idea of like, I'm free because I'm on my own, I think we need those relationships. We need to find love and in any, and again, with whoever that we want to be. But it's so important, I think, and we should not see it as necessarily restrictive, though again there is the toxic side of love, of course, and that's what we want to stay away from. But if you find that you connect with someone on a deep level, that is true freedom. That is absolute freedom in my view. And it's we don't really see it that way. Many people don't really see it that way.
I love this point, Arash, because there is the piece where there are times where we are meant to be alone.
Mhm,
Maybe after a breakup or
mhm,
during a big
mhm,
life change or something, where the work we want to do on ourselves feels as if it's
mhm,
best done
mhm,
here inside the self rather than having, our undone stuff splatter all over somebody else. And then there are some people in life who prefer to walk through life alone, and that's healthy and that's wonderful if it's done mindfully. I
mhm,
think what we want to be careful of is not being in relationship because it's coming from a place of fear. I don't ever want to
mhm.
trust
Yeah.
anyone again. I can't rely on anyone. I'm going to stay single or I'm going to get married but not let that person into my life or I'll be in a long-term partnership and I'm just going to be not that these are conscious thoughts, but I see them play out all the time where we're just going to have this sort of roommate coexisting relationship.
Mhm, mhm,
And when we do that, it's another form of that jail cell because I agree with you.
mhm,
When we allow ourselves to commune, truly commune
mhm,
with other
mhm,
people, to connect, to put our defenses down when
mhm,
the other
mhm,
person is safe and has earned our trust. Oh my goodness, there's so much freedom and so much true connection and discovery of life because when we're in a relationship with just ourselves. Sometimes we get a little bit limited. It's one of the
Mhm.
reasons like people want to come to psychotherapy
Right.
sessions because we get to, or why I have, really great girlfriends or a partner to bounce things off because others help us see life in different ways. They help
Mhm.
us see ourselves in different ways. And we can do that for ourselves and other people. It's just magnificent.
Mhm, mhm. Exactly. And through that have the growth. I remember reading a poem in German, Heinrich Heine, I think, talks about like when your heart gets broken, it's an age-old story, it happens to everyone, but to each person it feels new. And I think that is so important of also processing that and then moving on. And it doesn't mean that the next will end in heartache. So not kind of stopping. It's like, oh, I had like bad experiences, so I'm doomed. I mean, just exploring and learning from it and moving on and it really like going through the motions to grow from it, become a more complete person, I think, and seeing it as something in a way also beautiful because it's like, well, okay, it ended. Now we have to move on because that's what life is. It's a constant moving forward and not to get stuck or bogged down, but taking that next step. Difficult, yes. We need to go through it, but it's also beautiful because that is, I think, the lessons we need to have instead of hiding in that cave or in that comfort zone or in that jail. And it's like, I'm gonna step out whenever one is ready, yeah, without forcing oneself. But sometimes pushing yourself a bit out. Okay, I'm gonna try this again. I'm gonna give this another chance, and to keep moving on.
Absolutely. And I think the piece about loving and every time you love, whether it's an animal, a child, a romantic partner, a parent, anything, anytime you love, there's going to be pain. There
Mhm,
is.
mhm,
And I I still haven't come to terms with necessarily how this pain makes us a better person.
mhm,
It makes us understand pain more. It makes us appreciate love more. It makes us aware of the transitory nature of life. But there's it is every time that there's pain in relationship and people say, as you said, it's this growth opportunity. And I still giggle when I can about that
mhm.
because that is a kind of pain I would honestly prefer to do it
Yes, of course. Yeah.
because it's that part when we love
Mhm,
and it's just that it's the flip side of love in a way because the more we love and we don't want to do without the love,
mhm.
right? It's the
Yeah.
reason for being here.
Yes,
Yet
exactly.
when we lose a loved one
Mhm,
to death, to the
mhm,
ending of a relationship, whatever it is, I am so with people when they are in that pain because it feels
mhm,
like an
mhm,
excruciating
mhm.
physical when people say my heart is broken.
Mhm.
And I don't sit there and say, learn from it, grow through it,
No,
move through it,
no,
of course, right?
no.
Because you can just feel that in your own heart, that terrible pain of having lost and having lost someone, lost that love. And for me, as far as I've been able to come with it in my imperfect way, is to realize that that pain is a reminder that the love is never lost,
Mhm.
that maybe
That's
that
it.
person is no
That's it.
longer with us, but it's a reminder that we can always hold on to that beauty of that beauty of that connection to the self, to the other. And that's also why we get the privilege, I think, of looking back at our younger selves and saying,
Mhm.
gosh, I love you. You were in a
Yeah.
pretty raw form, but sure, I love you so much
Yes. Yes.
because I believe the love doesn't die. Where there is true
Mhm.
love,
That's it.
true love, not fake love or
Mhm.
toxic love, but where there is true love, I honestly don't believe it
Mhm.
dies.
Mhm. And so I want to finish on a positive note because our podcast is coming to an end. The three positive purposes that you talk about, I really like them. So we have to uplift, to grow, and to accept. Can you briefly talk about these 3 points, which I quite like?
I think you and I just covered them just so beautifully that to which order do you want to take them?
Starting with uplift.
Okay.
Mhm,
So I think that when we uplift and we use that as a verb, right? To uplift
Mhm,
the self,
mhm,
to uplift others. That does not mean that we're asking people to be happy all the time.
mhm, exactly.
That toxic positivity.
Mhm,
That is about using our energy, even if we're uplifting ourselves in sadness or grief and saying, it's okay to be sad right now. It's
mhm,
okay. Let me lift you up and hold you here
mhm,
while you're, or if you're seeing, something more physical, like litter on the ground or a person that you love crying, to go and uplift, to
mhm,
use your energy purposefully as in reaching toward to doing good. So I think that is a key piece, the uplift.
mhm,
I think the grow then comes from that, that when we are working to be in a state of uplift as often as we can't do it 24/7. We need our rest and we need to make allowances for, quiet and downtime, but we naturally grow when we become more intentional in our actions, when we're really trying to, just as we would with a garden, right?
mhm,
Where we take it and we clear out the weeds and we add some fertilizer. When we do that, the garden grows and the magic happens and the sun comes down and we add some water, whether it's rain or we're adding it through irrigation. But that growth does not happen by accident. It
mhm,
comes because of mindful tending. And
exactly.
then the last piece, the acceptance.
Mhm,
I think that there is so much in life that we want to have turn out a certain way. And I think that sets us up for disappointment. And
mhm,
I think one of the best things we can do is to, my little saying for that is, may I get out of, may my will of wanting, not stop the universe from doing what it needs me to do,
mhm,
or may I get out of the way of what the universe wants for me. And I think that is a way of acceptance, not that we accept things that are toxic, but instead that we believe that whatever our divine is, whatever our higher power is, that we're able to say, I'm going to do my best here. I'm going to do my best. I'm going to give it
mhm,
my all. But universe, I know that you have some special plans, and I'm just going to do the best to be here as a good person who's ever growing and learning. And, oh, I can still have my wishes and my wants and this, but I'm going to accept that my best efforts, my imperfect efforts, are what I need to do. And then be more accepting of the rest, of my imperfections, of life's imperfections, of others' imperfections.
exactly. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Carla Mary Manly, your clinical psychologist, author, podcaster, and many, many other things as well. Your book, your most recent book is The Joy of Imperfect Love, The Art of Creating Healthy, Securely Attached Relationships. Always a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for being on Rash's World.
Thank you for having me. It's been such a pleasure.
Thank you.
Bye for now.